Good afternoon. Here we are in the middle of a week and nothing done yet. Seems like we've wasted a lot of time this week. But the work this week is a continuation of last week and a continuation of all previous weeks, in that the entire secret of the work lies in the fact that success comes through the development of spiritual consciousness, so that all of our work is really of a continuing nature. It is not so much adding new knowledge to what we already have. There isn't too much knowledge of truth to be added to what we've already had. But it is really the unfolding or the developing or cultivating of a spiritual consciousness. Now, the measure of progress lies in this: in the degree in which the discords and inharmonies, the sins and the diseases of the world become less real to us, in that degree is the power of God becoming more real. Or it might be the other way around, that in the degree that God is becoming more real to us, these discords become less real. However, there's a function that we play in there, and that is the degree of our practice. For instance, as we go about our daily living, we are meeting people in all walks of life and on all levels of consciousness. And in these contacts we behold some who are good and some not so good, some healthy, some not so healthy. And ordinarily we just accept each person as they appear to be. Now, the longer we continue that, the longer we remain in our state of humanhood with its good and evil, sickness and health. Only as we consciously, specifically, change our thinking along that line to where we do not look at people and judge them as they seem to be, but rather translate the picture into what we know spiritual man to be, in that degree are we coming into the awareness of the allness of God and of the non-power of that which is. Let's see if we can make it a little bit clearer. There is no power in anything of an evil or erroneous nature. Let us say we are thinking of germs, infection, contagion. Now actually there is no power in a germ, no power for evil. There may be power in it, but if there is, it's a power of good. There is certainly no power of evil in it. Why? Because of the first chapter of Genesis. God made all that was made, and all that God made is good. And anything God didn't make wasn't made. That's the first chapter of Genesis. If then God made a germ, you can rest assured it's good. If God didn't make a germ, you can rest assured there aren't any. So in either case, we have nothing to fear from what the world calls a germ. Now then, as we go about our living, we are continuously witnessing people suffering from diseases of infection or contagion. It might be colds or grip or flu or scarlet fever or measles or typhoid fever or consumption. All of these so-called germ diseases. And you say, but if they are not power, how come these diseases? They're not power unless we give them the power through our ignorance of truth. In other words, when the world says that a condition can cause illness and accepts that belief, we automatically come under it. But if we, as truth students, set it aside, then we are no longer under the law, we are under grace. Now let's understand this point, won't you? Here we have the entire, call it mode or method, of attaining the spiritual or perfect life. When we are under Moses, we are under the law, and that means that every so-called human law operates upon us. If there is a law of germ disease, then we come under that law. If there is a law of sitting in the draft and catching cold, we come under that law. If there is a law that certain foods make you fat and certain foods make you thin, we come under that law. Never think that because we're truth students, that in and of itself removes us from the law. Oh, no. No, it isn't that easy. You just cannot join a truth center or a unity church or a Christian Science church and say, oh, now I'm a member. None of these things are going to bother me. Oh, no. There's no such thing as wholesale salvation or buying immunity from sin, disease, and death by joining some pet church or other. Immunity from all evil can be attained by anyone, but it must come as the direct result of an activity of truth in their own consciousness. In other words, the individual must do something about it. And just joining a truth movement isn't that something. No, 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 no. The something is a definite, a specific activity of truth in your consciousness or mine, an activity specifically indulged in. Now let us put it again this way. I said that as human beings we are under the law. And that means that anything that Materia Medica calls a law is a law unto us. Anything that theology says is a law unto us, like living 80 years and 10, that is a law unto us. Sometimes, if the world has a strong enough belief in astrology, that can be a law unto us, whether or not we accept it. It doesn't make a difference whether you go to a fortune teller or an astrologer, or even say, I don't believe in it. That in and of itself does not remove you from the law. Removing yourself from the law is a specific act of consciousness which you do daily. You can't do it once and be free forever. You have to pray without ceasing. And there's no fooling about that without ceasing business, because the moment you stop praying, you bring yourself back under the mesmerism of the world, and you come right back under the law again. That is what the Master meant when he said, "Go and sin no more." You would think that after he had healed a person of sin, that they didn't have the capacity to sin anymore. Oh, yes, they did. And he warned them that if they went back to their sins, that even worse things would come upon them. And so it is, if you bring yourself out from under the law and then sin again, which means go back under the law again, you're apt to bring more things on you than you had in the first place. Now, to come out from under the law and to come into grace means this: that every single day of the week you consciously remember your real relationship with God, and that you consciously remember that God's law is a spiritual law, not a material law. God's law is the reign of Christ, not the law of Moses. Now, let's not misunderstand this. This has nothing to do with whether we're Jewish people or Christian people. There are just as many Christian people under the law of Moses. There are more under the law of Moses than there are Jews, because there are more Christians than there are Jews. And every Christian is under the law of Moses, whether or not he knows it or whether or not he believes it. They're under the law of Moses until, through a specific act of your own consciousness, you remove yourself. And you have to remove yourself by realizing, I am not under the law of Moses, but under the divine grace of Christ. I am governed by Spirit, not by law. I and my Father are one. And all of the good of the Father is made manifest in my experience. Why? I'm the child of God. I'm joint heir with Christ to all the heavenly riches. And I live and move and have my being in spirit, in God. Now, these are things that we have to bring to conscious remembrance every day of the week. Every time we leave home, we have to remember, I'm not going out into a world of material laws. I'm not going out into a world of legal laws or even traffic laws. I'm going out into a world God-governed, God-maintained, God-sustained. Then, when you step out of your home into the world, you will find yourself divinely protected, divinely sustained, and even spiritually fed and clothed and housed. But the same thing applies when you come back into your home. There's no use of thinking, oh, I'm inside my home now, I'm out of that terrible world. That terrible world is just as much in your home as outside of your home, unless again you realize that the kingdom of God is here where I am. The place whereon I stand is holy ground, whether it's in the kitchen or the living room or the bathroom. The place whereon I stand is holy ground. Right here and now, the kingdom of God is made manifest in my experience. And so it comes again when evening comes. We cannot afford to say, oh, I knew the truth this morning. Oh no, that same truth is the truth now, but the same mesmeric influence of the world will come back and steal on you through the radio, through the newspapers, through the talk at the dinner table. All of the errors of the world will crowd back upon you unless you consciously and specifically rule it out. You say, that's a little bit too much work. That's a little too difficult. That calls for too constant a realization. I guess it does for a while, until it gets to be such a habit of thought that you do not any longer have to consciously make the effort. It is automatic. There does come a time when you will find that ideas of truth fill your consciousness throughout every one of your waking moments, and very often in your dreams at night. But the first few months, maybe even the first year, is one of continuous effort, continuous reminding yourself that I am not in the world, or if I am, I'm in it but not of it, but I'm not subject to the world's influences. I am not under the law but under grace. Now, no one can do this for you. You can be told about it. And if whoever is on this platform is elevated high enough in consciousness at the time they're here, they can bring about a great deal of freedom for you from discord, mental, moral, physical, financial. But that is only of a continuing nature as you continue to keep yourself in that elevation of thought, of consciousness. In other words, you can sin again even if you have been set free by the consciousness of the person on the platform, just as Jesus set them free, but they were free to go back to their erroneous ways. So here, you can come here for a week, a month. You can come regularly 2 and 3 times a week, and you can be set free. But you must maintain that freedom yourself. You have to keep yourself lifted in that atmosphere of truth. How? Through the conscious remembrance of the great truth that because of your relationship with God, you are not under the law. Now remember, there's only one reason you're not under the law. There's only one reason you're under divine grace, and that is because of your relationship with God. God is the father, mother, principle of existence, and we are the offspring. We are the divine children of an infinite and an eternal and an immortal principle. And because of that, we are in the world but not of it. We are under divine grace. Now then, if we had not come under this Adam belief of separation from God, we would be in the full enjoyment of divine grace. None of us would ever have to work for a living, or struggle for one, or take thought for what we shall eat or drink, or wherewithal we shall be clothed. These things would all follow in their normal, natural way, and our work would not be for a living. It would be for the purpose of expressing something that we had the ability to express, and to find joy in its expression. But that is not the case only because we have come under the sense of a separation from God. Now then, to bring yourself back is an act that you yourself must perform. When the prodigal son got low enough in the scale of troubles, discords, inharmonies, he bethought himself of his father's house. He thought of it himself. Came to his own awareness that he'd wandered far from this home of harmony and abundance. And he picked himself up and started back toward home. He did that himself. He did it all, and it was only while he was yet afar off that the Father came out to meet him. In other words, we start the ball rolling. We are the ones who consciously say to ourselves, now wait a minute, how much of sin or disease or lack must I let come into my life before I start back to the Father's house? Just how far down in the scale must I get before I think about the return to my Father's house? Probably this is far enough. And while I still have the capacity to do it, I'm turning around and going back to the Father's house. Well, that, of course, is the start. Then from there on is the journey back to the Father's house. And if you make that journey, and it's a mental one, it's a spiritual one, it's an act of your consciousness, of your conscious thinking, if you take that journey every day in the remembrance, I am not under the law because of my relationship with my Father, with God, I am under grace. I live and move and have my being in God. I dwell in the secret place of the Most High. I don't dwell in a city. I don't dwell in a house. I dwell in the secret place of the Most High. I don't live in Seattle. I live and move and have my being in God. Now, as we continue that line of spiritual activity, even while we are yet a long way off from complete realization, the Father begins to come out to meet us. And from then on, the load gets lighter, and instead of our having to do all of the thinking and all of the remembering, now the Father starts to speak to us. And instead of our thinking about the spiritual things of God, the first thing you know, we're hearing them. We're hearing them in the ear. The still small voice begins to assure us that I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. And when that comes, you may then say, aha, I'm still far off, but the Father has come out to meet me. And now the Father is imparting its assurances to me. And then you'll find that one sweet day you've awakened and the Father has placed upon you the robe and the ring. And you'll know that you're once more restored to the realization of your divine sonship. Strangely enough, never forget that there has never been a break in that relationship. Never. Not any more than there is a break in the relationship when we leave home or leave mother and father. The relationship is the same. We've merely left home and taken ourselves away from it. But the relationship exists, and we can return at any time and usually find the mother and father waiting for us, very eagerly, sometimes with a lamp in the window. So we do in our spiritual journey. It does seem at times as if God had removed itself from us and was not too much concerned about us. But that is no more true spiritually than it is true about our human parents. Even though they keep quiet and don't write us and do not interfere in our lives, you may be assured that in their hearts they're waiting there for our return. So it is spiritually. While the Father does not interfere in our existence, and anybody who wants to get down far enough to eat with the swine has royal permission to do so. Anyone who wishes to go down into sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, will find that they have the right and the privilege, and they can go as far as they like. But that has no significance spiritually. It doesn't mean that the Father doesn't care. It doesn't mean that the Father isn't standing there ready to help. It only means that we haven't attained the realization of David. When David says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art there." If we, in our sins and sicknesses, lack and limitation, were to constantly remind ourselves, "I will not fear these conditions, because God is right here with me and going through the experience with me," we would very quickly be lifted out. It is only because we go through our discords and inharmonies and leave God out of the picture that we are not quickly lifted up. It is only in the ability to understand God as consciously present within your own being, within your own consciousness. It is only in the degree of that awareness that we find God helping us at every step. Otherwise, it appears as if God was standing in the background waiting for us to get far enough down on the ladder to turn around and say, "Father, I'm coming back up." How actually there is no such thing as separation from God. Actually, there is no such thing as wandering off and wasting our substance. Actually, there is no such thing as going down to eat with the swine. That is all an experience that we bring on ourselves through permitting the sense of separation from God to creep in. And therefore, the Bible has given us, if you like, formulas by which we not only can return to the Father's house, but once we achieve a measure of it, remain there. And you will find those formulas in such statements as, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee." Let anyone keep their mind stayed on God, and I really mean stayed on God, and they will find that harmony will be restored to them, and once it is restored, that harmony will remain as a permanent dispensation. You have another one in, "Lean not unto thine own understanding, acknowledge him in all thy ways, and he will give thee peace." In the same way, let a person make up their mind that from the time they waken in the morning until they sleep at night, they will acknowledge that God gave them their rest at night, and God awakened them in the morning, and God provided meals, and God provided clothing, and God provided housing. We still say thank you to the human person who is responsible for our welfare, but always acknowledging that behind that human person is God, and that it is actually from God that we derive our good. Then the continuous recognition of God's presence as protection, as safety, as security, the constant recognition of God as the only real power. Now, just with those two statements, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee," and "Acknowledge him in all thy ways, and he will give thee peace," just the remembrance of those two ideas will bring us back to the Father's house, and once we get back, will keep us there. It isn't too difficult, especially when you realize the good that is to be received, because from this activity of truth in our consciousness, we eventually drop more than 90% of the sins, diseases, death, lack, and limitation that mankind usually runs into. And so it's really worthwhile. Now, the point that I'm emphasizing today is this. Do not believe just because you go to truth centers or read truth literature that in and of itself is going to be your salvation from discords and inharmonies, because it isn't. True, just going to the center and exposing yourself to some truth from others is helpful, and of course reading is helpful also, but don't lean too heavily on that as making your demonstration. You may be disappointed. There comes that further step that you yourself must take. Just as you must eat your own meals and digest your own food and sleep your own sleep, no one can do those things for you. So in the spiritual realm, you yourself must expose yourself to God. You yourself must make God the central theme around which your entire day works. It has been the custom in other religions to reserve God for Sunday or a weekday or a little Bible reading. But we have discovered in our work that nothing less than a full devotion to God will bring about the harmonies that we desire. Those not ready for that step will still have to take their human experiences with a mixture of good and a mixture of evil, a mixture of sickness and a mixture of health, and ultimately with the idea of age and death. Each one consciously sets it aside as you come out and become separate. Now watch. As human beings, you are under the law. You are under every law of lack and limitation and depression and political change, under every law of medical belief or astrological belief that there is in the world. And it is for that reason that you may believe that you've been a truth student for many years, but the ills of the world still keep after you. Yes, and they still will keep after you until you make the transition yourself. I am not under the law. I am under grace. Why am I under grace? Because of my relationship with God. God is my father, mother, principle. God is my life. God is the very activity of my being and of my body. It is God that keeps me in peace. It is God that feeds me and maintains me and sustains me. It is God in whom I live and move and have my being. I dwell in the secret place of the Most High. I dwell in the sanctuary of life, truth, and love. All that the Father hath is mine, because the Father is ever with me. I and the Father are one. No time, no place do I go anywhere alone. I and the Father are always together. The place whereon I stand is holy ground, because God is where I am. God is my meat and my bread and my wine and my water. God governs my going out and my coming in. God is the spiritual law of grace unto my being. It is my Father's good pleasure to give me the kingdom. Why? Because I seek to live in God always. I seek to make God my conscious dwelling place. I shall dwell in the consciousness of the Lord forever. I will dwell consciously in God forever. I will remind myself day by day that I live and move and have my being in God, not in a human world. I will remind myself every day that the laws of the so-called world are not binding upon me because they are not power. God, Spirit alone is power. Whatever it is of a human nature, temporal, finite, is not power. Whether it's voiced by materia medica, whether it's voiced by theology, whether it's voiced by astrology, whoever, wherever, whenever a material law is voiced, it is not power, since God in the midst of me is the only power. God in the midst of me is mightier than many waters. God in the midst of me is my very soul and being, my support, my law and my lawgiver. Spirit, Spirit, Spirit alone. And only Spirit is power, and only Spirit is present. And so, as we go about in that conscious, constant realization and begin to know that this same thing, you see, we pray for our enemies too. As we walk around the street, shopping, marketing, office, business, we know this truth about everyone we meet. The fact that they may not know it or may not be interested in it has nothing to do with us. Whether someone wants the love of God or not is no business of ours. Each one has the right to their own choosing, but no one has the right to prevent me from praying. And my prayer is a realization of God's government, and I wouldn't feel safe in God's government if it wasn't available to every soul on earth, saint or sinner. I wouldn't feel safe if I thought there was a law for some and not for others. It would be like believing that there is a sunshine, but that only a few people can get into it. No, all that is of God is universal. All that is of God is for saint and sinner. His rain falls on the just and on the unjust. Neither do I condemn thee. We are never under a law of punishment, past, present, or future, if we accept God. Now, there is a theological law of punishment. There is a medical law of punishment. There is a material law of punishment. But once you remove yourself from that consciously and decide that you are under grace, then you may say, though my sins were scarlet, I am white as snow. The very moment that you remove yourself from the law of Moses and bring yourself under the law of grace, you are forgiven. And you say, yes, but supposing I sin again tomorrow? Well, the Master says we'll forgive 70 times 7. Nobody has the capacity to sin 70 times 7. So you may be assured that long before the 490th forgiveness comes around, you will have been purified. So if you just sin and get forgiven tomorrow and sin and get forgiven the next day, don't think that you're a hypocrite when you ask for forgiveness the third time. You're a long way off from that 490th. So let us remember this. The moment that you accept God as your life, as your soul, as your being, that moment you can claim for yourself divine forgiveness. And should you make a mistake and slip up the next day or the next week, go right back and claim your forgiveness under the law of 490. And you might keep track if you like. You'll find you'll never get up to that 490 if you'll be so pure before then. As we keep turning to God, the miracle that takes place isn't always sudden instantaneous, it's gradual. And that is why most of us have difficulty. We look on ourselves today and last month and we say, I don't think I've made any progress. And of course, outwardly that is perfectly true. Inwardly, however, the very moment we turn to God and maintain that turning day by day, something began to happen within us. And just as planting the seed in the garden, there's no use of looking at the garden tomorrow or next week and wondering why we haven't got peaches. It all comes in its due time. It goes through a lot of processes between the breaking up of the seed in the ground and the appearance of the fruit on the trees. And it is with us too. There is no such thing as speedy salvation. There is instantaneous healing through the work of a practitioner or teacher, and there is sometimes the instantaneous overcoming of sin. But usually you'll find that life transformations only come about slowly through the breaking down of our own material sense and the building up of a spiritual sense. And that's done with time and effort. The way is straight and narrow. Few there be that enter, because few there be that will stick day by day, week by week, month by month, in the spite of no seeming outer change, and yet stick right to their text and stick right to their principle, God. God is my grace. God is the health of my countenance. God is my fortress, my sanctuary, my temple. I live and move in God under divine grace. I live under the law of forgiveness. I forgive all those who have trespassed against me, and in turn, that forgiveness that I give comes back to me. The forgiveness that I express becomes the forgiveness that I receive, because there's only one forgiveness, and it's going out and coming in all of the time. And you watch, as we maintain that, we make our progress. It is just as when I explained these things 2 years ago, and so far as any outward evidence is concerned, it would seem that it had not made too deep an impression. And yet, each time that I came back and repeated these things, brought forth these principles, and each time that you came and reached out for the touch of the Christ, something did happen, because all of a sudden the entire picture changed, and we find now many, many, many who understand this principle and in some measure are demonstrating this principle. And so it didn't happen overnight and all at once. It has been a gradual process of building up over the past 2 years. And I can assure you that if this same effort should be continued for 2 more years, you would find drastic changes in your own experience and in the experience of those who are daily putting this principle to work. Well, suppose for a closing that we have a meditation, and in this meditation, let us realize that the voice of God is revealing its truth within us, because for the balance of this week we have these afternoon sessions, and then we have the night classes, and we have a big program of conclusion on Sunday at 11 a.m., 2 p.m., and 8 p.m. And the measure of good that we get out of this remaining work hasn't so much to do with what I say as with our ability to receive in consciousness what God imparts. And so let our meditation today be that God is revealing within us, uttering within us, speaking within us, revealing within us its truth. That must be our theme all week.
Now, in this fourth dimension, I speak to you in new tongues. I speak to you of spiritual freedom. You have heretofore been concerned with human freedom, with freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of spiritual worship, freedom to worship even paganistically. You have been concerned with economic freedom, the freedom to earn a living, to be financially secure. Economic freedom and religious freedom, two names for slavery, bondage to dollars and to man-made rules. What is freedom? Freedom is being. The man whose being in Christ is free. Freedom is life living itself. Freedom is joy and peace. Freedom is not obedience to man-made laws. Freedom has nothing to do with someone else's consent that we earn a livelihood or that we live in peace. Freedom is the joy of life. Freedom is the song of the soul. Freedom is the dream of the dreamer. I am free and you are free, but not while we are attached to the wheel of human thought, not while we are in obedience to man-made government of the soul. What difference does it make to which flag you give allegiance? Freedom is not a condition of government. Freedom is a condition of the soul. There have been free men under dictators, men who knew that their bodies could be imprisoned, but not they themselves. Men have prospered in hard times. Men have survived panic and war, flood and famine. When the soul of man is free, it carries him through Red Seas and desert experiences to the promised land of spiritual peace. As we seek peace within, we find harmony without. As we turn to the kingdom of our inner self, we find the reign of divine power in the outer world. Let us find the freedom of the soul within, and we will experience the freedom of grace without. What prevents us from enjoying all the good that may be found on earth, from living in the highest realm of harmony, health, and wealth? Is there any power decreeing and enforcing poverty, disease, death? Are there positive laws of lack and limitation, laws outside us, binding us to the wheel of slavery, of hard labor and trials? And if so, from whence do they emanate? Wherever we look, we may see evidences of the fact that the world has ever sought for freedom, peace, joy, and plenty. But this search has been chiefly in the feverish activity of the human mind, in the tiring energy of brain-racked thought. As in human thought is all the anguish of passion, greed, lust, false ambition, fear, and domination, so in the human mind alone is run the race for lawless possession and gluttonous acquisition, and the result is not freedom, but enslavement to the senses. Therefore, is it not true that the human mind, falsely educated through the centuries, contains within itself all the fears and failures of the human race? But if one suddenly decided to stop worrying, to stop fearing, and to withdraw from this struggle for freedom through mortal thinking, would not some unseen, unknown power reveal itself to human thought? and unfold without strife or woe the infinite abundance and presence of that bread which cometh down from heaven, satisfying all mental, physical, and financial needs. With the limitation of mortal thought removed, may we not find in the enlarged vision of fearless, fetterless being the freedom of the race? Where but in the realm of this greater understanding may one find the infinity of his good? Where but in the broad consciousness of his immortal being can the individual find his thirst slaked with the water of the river of life, the water sipped in fearless rest that will forever end the thirst for water that does not satisfy? Where but in the realm of this newer consciousness can be found the meat that ends the heart hunger of unsatisfied desires, or the wine of true inspiration that does not make drunk, but frees the mind from the dizzying influence of the senses? Freedom is a quality of thought and condition experienced only when attachment to the manifest realm is broken. Above and beyond the lure of mortal sense is the life divine, the life where one enters into his heritage of freedom. What does this freedom mean? To live in the world and yet to be free from the bondage of its attractions. To enjoy friendships and yet not to be dependent upon them. To welcome money for the things it will buy, but not to be avaricious. These things lead to true freedom. To work, not merely to earn a living, but to find even in the most humble work a means of making someone more comfortable. To seek to raise the standard of our work even 1 degree, or to find a better way of doing the work at hand, this brings freedom from drudgery, and eventually freedom from lack and limitation. To love our families and not to be disturbed by their failings or too proud of their achievements, this too is freedom. To stand in back of the world and watch its comings and goings, its successes and its failures, its loves and its hates, and not to be overcome or involved, this is freedom.